Welcome to Kamjiverse. This is your exclusive bridge between the legacy of classical Africa and the triumphs of modern African revolutions. You won't find this connection anywhere else. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Share this video with friends and family. Become a channel member or join our Patreon. The links are waiting in the description. Let's honor our sacred legacy and ignite our future together. A welcome to a special conversation on the question that has intrigued scholars and enthusiasts alike. Were the ancient Sumerians black? I am your host, and today we're honored to be joined by elder scholar Chuck Morgan, whose decades of research into African and Eurasian prehistory shed new light on this debate. Over the next few minutes, we'll examine the latest genetic evidence from archaeological remains in southern Iraq, analyze the linguistic connections and misconnections between Sumerian, Kemetic, and Proto-Indo-European languages, and debunk common pseudo-linguistic claims that have muddied the waters. This discussion isn't just academic, it's about how we define blackness in deep time. Together, we'll propose a clear rubric based on culture, kinship, and self-identification to help us decide who counts as black in the ancient world and why it matters today. So let's step back 4 millennia, listen to the voices written on clay tablets, and see what the science and Chuck Morgan have to tell us about the Sumerians.
Were the ancient Sumerians black, and did they have blackheads? The answer is no, and that should come as no surprise. However, there are some today who are attempting to hijack or supplant another culture and people as their own. So let's briefly look at the facts regarding the ancient Sumerians. In an area of southern Iraq existed one of the world's most enigmatic societies, the Sumerians. They were a non-Semitic, non-Indo-European, and a non-African people who flourished in southern Mesopotamia from the beginning of the 4th to the end of the 3rd millennium. BCE, their origins was a subject of very intensive debate which began more than a century ago. Many authors tried to solve the so-called Sumerian problem with the help of the available archaeological, linguistic, and even osteological data of the time, but without any universally accepted conclusion. During this long stretch of time, the Sumerians' racial and linguistic affiliations remain unclassifiable. The Sumerians, who spoke an isolated language not correlated to any linguistic family, are the most ancient group living in the region for which we have historical evidence. They occupied the delta between the two rivers in the southern part of the present Iraq. One of the oldest inhabited wetland environments, the Semitic groups were semi-nomadic people who spoke a Semitic language and lived in the northern area of the Syro-Arabian desert, breeding small animals. From here, they reached Mesopotamia, where they settled among the pre-existing populations. The Semitic people, more numerous in the north, and the Sumerians, more represented in the south, after having absorbed the pre-existing populations, melted their cultures, laying the basis of the Western civilization. In search of the genetic footprints of Sumerians, a survey of Y chromosome and mtDNA variation in the Marsh Arabs of Iraq. In the study of DNA samples collected from various groups in the area, African haplogroups were also analyzed. And the following are their conclusions. African haplogroups are of North, East, and Sub-Saharan African origin and represent minor components in both groups. The Northeast African contribution is mainly represented by HGM1, which accounts for 2.8% of Marsh Arabs and 1.2% of the Iraqi sample, the latter displaying also 0.6% of HGU6. The Sub-Saharan African component comprised HGSLOL1, L2 and L3, and accounted for 4.9% in the marshes and 9.1% of the control sample. Out of the 12 African subhaplogroups identified in this survey, 6 in the marshes, and 7 in the control sample, only one L2A1 was shared between the two Iraqi groups. We often don't realize how strongly hair features are stratified across continents. For instance, straight hair is virtually non-existent in sub-Saharan Africa, whereas we only really see variation in hair color in West Eurasia. We identified the gene POX3 as the monobrow gene. It has previously been shown to control where in the face Nazian is located, the point at the middle of two eyebrows. So, it is reasonable to see it associated with monobrow too, which is hair covering that part. Rare mutations of POX3 have been shown to cause Waardenburg syndrome type 1. 85% of patients with this condition have monobrows. But the prevailing elephant in the room that Black Sumerian theorists tend to ignore is the noticeable monobrows, which is not an outstanding African facial feature and not a significant depiction in African art. Much of the artwork of the ancient Mesopotamians has that noticeable trait, a feature not commonly found in ancient African iconography. However, it's prevalent throughout ancient Sumer and the Middle East generally. The monobrow to them was a staple of style, beauty, and social status. This continues to be the case in places like Iraq, but also in modern Arabia, Tajikistan, and India. The Sumerians informs us that the brow was a sacred gift from Enlil. Enlil gave you your fierce face and your serious brow. The Ininu stands among rumbling, roaring storms. Its awe-inspiring eyebrow-shaped arch meets the admiring eyes of the gods. In contrast, however, unibrow depictions in ancient Egyptian art are virtually non-existent. Nowhere in the entire corpus of Sumerian literature do we find mention of the Sumerians' ruling class, or otherwise, as being black. Therefore, it's illogical to conclude, based on 2025 interpretations of Black Berberis, that this Bronze Age society would refer to themselves as such, singling out just their heads as black, rather than a more substantive term for the entire body or a person being black. And even if it did mean a black-skinned person, that unto itself wouldn't necessarily mean an African people. Modern scholars have presented several lines of evidence that refute the theory of the Sumerians being of Kushite origin. One of the essential reasons for the misinterpretations of blackhead can be traced back to the book of Genesis 2:13. The conclusion is that Kiz, the city-state, was founded by Cush of the Bible. This Cush is believed by some to have been the son of Nimrod. For example, from a book called Eden in Sumer on the Niger by Catherine Obianuju Akalonu. She maintains the fallacy that the ancient Sumerians were not only African, but that they created the Egyptian civilization, as well as those in the Indus Valley. She wrote the following: as the oldest civilization in the world, Sumer birthed the Egyptian civilization by 3100 BC. For the first king of Egypt was a Sumerian from the land of Nubia, sub-Saharan Africa. Sumer's first city was called Kish. Kish was established and ruled by Nimrod, the grandson of Ham by Co. 3900 BC. Her comments are totally false, and here's why. Kiz cause 2. Firstly, Kiz is defined as totality. Its attestation can be found in an administrative text. It is found in the early dynastic 3 period, 2600 to 2500 BC, TSO 881. Nothing regarding this word can be linked to the biblical Cush, or the land of Cush. Cause, in Sumerian grammar, is used as a determinative, a classifier used before names of leather items or animal hide. For the record, this cause can be found on numerous inscriptions. Kazjiji means black skin. The word for skin here, cause, is used for skin. For example, skin, leather, body. However, 'cause Gigi describes the black skin of specific animals and not people, such as Kushites. Certainly, if the Sumerian scribes of Kish wanted to say they were black-skinned people, they would have simply inscribed it in text, but they didn't. This word combination, 'cause Gigi, is only found on a Babylonian tablet and not from a Kiz text. Thirdly, there's the verb cause, to, which means to become tired, to become exhausted, to be out of breath, Halloran. Cause, too, has the same pronunciation as Kush. This, too, has zero to do with the ancient peoples of North Africa or the Bible. Therefore, she was absolutely wrong. In a book called Nimrod, the Mighty, King of Kish, King of Sumer and Akkad, by the noted scholar Yigal Levin of Ramat Gan of the University in Israel, on pages 351 to 366, he offers some compelling research work on the identity and origins of the Nimrod and Kush narratives. The intent of this paper is to examine the story of Nimrod in Genesis 10, 8 to 12, offering fresh insight on both the historical background and the literary development of the passage. The article deals first with the passage's literal meaning, syntax, and the extant text. The geographic context of the passage is shown to be distinctly Mesopotamian. Nimrod, being the builder of Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and other southern Mesopotamian cities, and then moving north to Assyria. After surveying previous attempts to identify an historical Nimrod, the author then suggests that the biblical figure is modeled after the combined traditions about Sargon of Akkad and his grandson, Naram-Sin. Nimrod is the son of Cush. Sargon began his royal career at Kish right after the flood. The Sargon-Naram-Sin traditions reached the Levant during the 2nd millennium BCE, being combined by time and distance into a composite personality. The tradition reached its final form during the reign of Sargon II of Assyria, who added such themes as hunting to the story. The later editors of the Book of Genesis dropped much of the story, and the Nimrod tradition was thus lost to later generations, save 5 remaining verses in the 10th chapter of Genesis. The biblical Nimrod, then, is not a total counterpart of any one historical character. He is rather a composite Hebrew equivalent of the Sargonic dynasty, the first mighty king to rule after the flood. Later influence modified the legend in the Mesopotamian tradition, adding such details as the hero's name, his territory, and some of his deeds, and most important, his title, King of Kish. The later editors of the Book of Genesis dropped much of the story and mistakenly identified the Mesopotamian Kish with the Hamitic Kush. The Nimrod tradition was thus lost to later generations, save 5 remaining versus the 10th chapter of Genesis. Linguistic evidence. The Sumerian language is unrelated to any of the known languages spoken in Africa, including Cushitic languages. Sumerian is considered and classified as a language isolate, meaning it has no known linguistic relatives. The Sumerian writing system, known as cuneiform, is distinct from the writing systems used in Africa during the same time period. The Sumerian texts represent, first of all, the literary language, and in the most important period, from the beginning of year 3 to the end of the Old Babylonian period, it has no connection with the spoken language, since Sumerian probably died out in the last centuries of the 3rd mill. BC development means therefore not the development of the spoken vernacular, but rather the changes of the written language. Sumerian, an important language isolate of the ancient Near East, the language of ancient Sumer, spoken in southern Mesopotamia from about 3100 BC. Sumerian was replaced by Akkadian as a spoken language around 2000 BC, but continued to be used as a sacred, ceremonial, and scientific language until about 100 BC. Sumerian is a language isolate and it is highly unlikely that we will ever find a language related to it. Nearly all of the 6,000 or so languages known to us today are separated from Sumerian by a time gap of thousands of years, which is all but impossible to bridge with the methods of historical and comparative linguistics. Scholars have wasted much effort looking for living cognates of ancient Sumerian, not realizing that the problem is practically insoluble for the following reasons. Sumerian must have separated from a hypothetical language, family of which it was part in the middle or late 4th millennium BC. At the latest, we know next to nothing about the sound and structure of Sumerian before the middle of the 3rd millennium. Thus, there is a gap of at least 2,000 years between that time and the oldest reconstructible form of any of the languages which have been compared to. Sumerian, for example, Turkish, Hungarian. Efforts to find cognates have been exclusively based on the sound of individual words. Yet, according to W. Dieters, 1963-76, who discussed the problem of Basque-Caucasian affinities, any words in languages A and B that sound alike today are more likely to be unrelated than related, because they are the product of phonetic evolution over several millennia, to mention the possible diachronically change of meaning. Archaeological and cultural evidence. The material culture, architecture, and artifacts found in Sumerian sites do not share significant similarities with those of ancient African civilizations. The religious beliefs, social structures, and economic systems of the Sumerians are distinct from those of ancient African cultures. The geographical location of Sumer in southern Mesopotamia does not align with the known distribution of Cushitic and other African cultures. Recent advances in DNA analysis and ancient genomics have not found any strong genetic links between the Sumerians and populations from Africa. Skeletal and anthropological studies of Sumerian remains indicate that they were physically distinct from the populations of ancient Kush and other African regions. Part of the reason for this lack of DNA verification is unfortunately due to the chemical composition of Mesopotamian soil that does not permit preserving ancient DNA. The followers of New Archaeology aimed at the reconstruction of interactions between human populations and their environments. This new paradigm, the research on human remains, was much more underlined than in the discussion on the Sumerian race. Also because the general poor state of preservation of bones in Mesopotamia, the scarcity of well-preserved skulls, which were suitable for racial speculations, made physical anthropology only a supplement for linguistic and archaeological data in ethnogenetical speculations. Historical and textual evidence. There are no references to the Sumerians having any direct cultural, political, or economic connections with ancient African civilizations in Sumerian or other contemporary written records. The Sumerian creation myths and historical accounts do not mention any African origins or influences, but rather focus on their indigenous development in Mesopotamia. In early inscriptions, the word used to describe humanity, as found in Sumerian inscriptions, was gnam.lu. .lu, a word found 5 different times. It was in the early dynastic 3B period, c. 2900 to 2350 BC, 13 times in the Ur III period, 186 times in Old Babylonian, once in Middle Babylonian, 12 times in Neo-Assyrian, and once in Neo-Babylonian. Sagig to Ga comes in as a word later, after Nam.lu. Lu had already been in textual sources. We can see that its earliest attestation as Sagig, found once in the Ur III period. Then it's used 46 times during the Old Babylonian period, 1 for the Middle Assyrian, 3 for the Middle Babylonian, 5 for the Neo-Assyrian, and once in the Neo-Babylonian. Source: Electronic Sumerian Pennsylvania Dictionary 2, E. PSD 2. So, With all that we know about this term blackheads, it appears after the Akkadian and Gutian rule of Sumer. In other words, in pre-Sargonic Sumer, they already used a term that would describe themselves as humanity, and that was Nam Lulua to date. We have Nowak's earlier attestations for Sa Gig Tuga prior to the Ur III period. Sumerians never gave a real definition of what human beings were. Rather, they describe human activities and the human place in their world order. After the first creation phase, man behaves like a beast. Only in the second phase does he get the instruments for the establishment of culture. Ultimately, he becomes a true human, as a gift from the gods, having the ability to revere the Inona of the royal seed. From a book by Stephanie Daly, she holds a non-literal position regarding the term blackheads. The expression black-headed people is normally understood to be a poetic term for mankind in general. It may also imply contrast with fair-haired people living beyond the bounds of ancient Mesopotamia. Myths from Mesopotamia Creation, The Flood, Gilgamesh, and Others, by Stephanie Daly. It's interesting to note, when discussing the Sumerian people and language, when it came to humanity, the Akkadians offered a window into the way the Sumerians saw humanity. The expression Saumat Kakadi, an Akkadian word, is a poetic term referring to mankind as a totality, created by the gods and kept in safe pastures by the kings. The literal meaning likewise poses a problem because the ref to black hair is without any parallel in Akkadian. This Akkadian reference to humanity can be found in many Akkadian inscriptions. The CAD Chicago Assyrian Dictionary gives us several citations beginning on page 75. In the interest of clarity, there's also an online bogus claim of a 4,000-year-old inscription about the dark heads, Sumerians. Many have cited this caption as textual evidence that the Sumerians were black and that blonde-hair bluists were unknown. 4,000-year-old inscription by Sumerian Ludindra. We migrated to where we are living now thousands of years ago, but they were unable to write down from where because they did not know how to write then. Later on, inquisitive scribes and archivists in the royal palace studied the orally transmitted information in an attempt to find out about the past. Our people came to this land from a mountainous country to the northeast, but it is also said that some of them had come via sea from a land called Dilmun in the east. And the reason behind this migration is said to be the onset of an unexplained drought in their warm and rainy country. Great Enlil had some of us dark heads settle here. According to rumors and the results of my research as to why we have called ourselves darkheads, I found out that before our forefathers migrated here, blonde-haired and blue-eyed people were living next to their country. I cannot visualize a person with blonde hair and blue eyes, and I don't think it would be nice. I have not seen any person like that in my country. The above quote has been used for years by advocates of the Black Sumerians ideology for years online, and never addressed. When you take the time to research it, you'll discover it to be fallacious, having been claimed and cited by a Sumerian. Here are the facts. Ludira was a Sumerian nobleman and poet of Nippur who dedicated a love poem to his mother and to eulogies to his father and wife. The eulogies with which he glorifies his mother has been compared to the Songs of Songs. Ludira's poem honors his mother. He wrote absolutely nothing about, nor mentions blue-eyed blonde, or yellow-haired people. For that matter, that claim is simply a demonstrable lie. Another lie that's easily debunked comes from the claims by individuals such as Clyde Winters. For example, from the writing of Clyde Winter, Black Kushites of Sumer and Akkad by Clyde Winters, Ph.D., he writes the following. to make the Sumerians' white textbooks print pictures of artifacts dating to the Gutian rule of Lagash, to pass them off as the true originators of Sumerian civilization. No Gutian rulers of Lagash are recognized in the Sumerian king list. In another set of writings on Reddit, Winters says, Cole Henry Rawlinson, 1853, claimed the Sumerians came from Africa and that they were Kushites. Rawlinson used the Book of Genesis to find the identity of the Mesopotamia. The fact is, most of the iconography of Sumerians, as well as their literature, comes during the third dynastic period of Sumer, Lagash, and Europe. This would be after the Akkadian and Guti occupations. The Sumerian kings list indicates that King Uruto of Uruk was defeated by the Guti, perhaps around 2150 BC. The Guti swept down, defeated the demoralized Akkadian army, took Akkad, and destroyed it around 2115 BC. However, they did not supplant all of Akkad, as several independent city-states remained alongside them, including Lagash, where a local dynasty still thrived and left numerous textual and archaeological remains. The Gutian period was from 2199 to 2119 BC, succeeding the Akkadian Empire. The Gutians as a people appear first in mid-3rd millennium sources from Babylon under the Akkad dynasty, Ka 23502-200 BCE. They are depicted as raiders who disrupt agricultural life. Textual sources suggest that the Gutians' administration showed little concern for maintaining agriculture, written records, or public safety. They reportedly released all farm animals to roam about Mesopotamia freely, and soon brought about famine and rocketing grain prices. The decline coincided with severe drought, possibly connected with climatic changes reaching across the area from Kemet to Greece. They were regarded as the massive horde that destroyed the Akkadian Empire. There are no Guti busts, statues, or pictures while they occupied Sumer. Akkad bore the brunt of this as the center of the empire, so that it was in Akkad that the Guti established their own center in place of the destroyed Akkad. Some of the Sumerian cities in the south took advantage of the distance and purchased a certain amount of self-government by paying tribute to the new rulers. Uruk was thus able to develop a fifth dynasty. The best-known Sumerian ruler of the Gutian period was the Insi governor of Lagash Gudea. Under him, Ka 2075 BC, Lagash had a golden age, or what was popularized as the Sumerian Renaissance period. Guti rulers were expelled from Mesopotamia by the rulers of Uruk and Europe when Utuhingal of Uruk defeated the Gutian king Terrigen. Utuhingal's victory revived the political and economic life of southern Sumer. The images of what Clyde Winters calls Gutian and Sumerian. The images Winters provides says Gutian on the left and Sumerian on the right. However, they are all Sumerians. All anyone has to do is visit a museum or pick up a book where these images are clear, vivid, and cataloged. The image Gutian is not Gutian at all, nor were they excavated from Lagash. It dates between the 1st and 2nd dynasty periods of Sumer in 2900–550 BC. It was part of what's known as dedicatory statues that were excavated in the ancient city of Ishnana Temple, modern Tel Asmar. It is dated from early dynastic 1 and 2. The other image he claimed is Gutian is from the same excavation site at Tel Asmar. According to Assyriologist Thorklid Jacobson, it's a statue of Ninurta, god of thunder showers and floods of spring. Another statue from the same site collection is located today in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, made of gypsum, shell, black limestone, and bitumen. This just goes to show that some will purposely lie to the public in order to claim that the Sumerians were black, and that the images are of Gutians resulting from some grand conspiracy theory. But as you can see, this has been debunked. Conclusion: did the Sumerians have black heads? Were they black? Based on the research, the answer is no. There are just a few references in Sumerian and Akkadian literature that mention the terms Salmat Kakadi or the term Sagega. There is no textual, archaeological, not iconography which supports the idea that the Sumerians used a racial epithet to describe themselves. It's illogical to conclude that the Sumerians would single out just a head, a black head, and not their entire body as being black. It is also intellectually dishonest to take a modern racial term and apply it to ancient people, implying that these ancient people used it when they didn't. Fortunately, today's Sumerologists and Assyriologists are correcting and bringing about accuracy to long-held misinterpretations and poorly understood terms in Sumerian literature, such as the black-headed people.
Join the Comgiverse Patreon for exclusive content, behind-the-scenes access, and special perks. Support the channel and connect with a community of revolutionary intellectuals and scholars. Click the link in the description to join now.